Okay, we are doing some training here and we're dealing with the SOP for, let's see, dealing with the SOP for grout fill, and we've got an issue here with a difference in viscosity of the product as it goes down. Look that word up if you need to. But so the first thing I need to test in order to be able to train a guy the right solution is I need to test the absorption of the concrete. So concrete is absorbent. In my hand here, I have a few ounces of a solvent, xylene, which is a really slow evaporating solvent. Solvents are good at going down into things and absorbing into things. We have a piece of concrete here that is uncoated, and we have a piece that is coated with epoxy, cured epoxy. Part of it's been cut back over there. And so if you'll watch, when the xylene hits this concrete, concrete goes dark, okay? It's because the xylene is absorbing into it. And it happens almost immediately on an uncoated piece of concrete. Now the concrete where the epoxy is, it's already dark. Similarly, okay, if I were to take some of that xylene, clean that dust off, then very similar there. All right, so now we get over here into cut back areas. All right, so all of this area has been cut back with the same tool at the same rate. But we've got one area that's darker and one area that's lighter, and that's because the epoxy in this lighter area right here did not absorb as far into the concrete as it did here. Okay, so absorption into a substrate affects the color, and the more absorption you've got, the deeper color that you get. Now, both of these have been cut back. That means the excess epoxy on the surface has been cut away with a 100 grit diamond. But, you know, per what we're trying to do here, there is epoxy embedded down into the surface, down below the surface, into little micro cracks and pores and things like that. All right, but not necessarily very deep in areas that are tighter, like in between the micro cracks right there. Doesn't seem to be much. Whereas in here, you got the micro cracks filled, and then you've got quite a bit of absorption into the matrix in between, into those tighter areas. And that's because of the viscosity difference. So now, what I want to do is see how absorbent each area is with xylene. So we just pour it right on the border between the two there. So we get some absorption into each one, but we can still see the difference there. And what I want to see in particular is how it evaporates. So I'm going to let that sit and see how it evaporates out. Now, if we go back over here to the spot that I did first, which is right there, it's already evaporated, so concrete's back to its normal color, okay? So we saw how that evaporated right there, or that absorbed rather, right there. I don't know if you can see it with the camera, probably not. I can still see with my eyeball a trace of the border between the two. Now, the way you can identify that on this video is you can follow that line right across. You notice how on the darker side of the line where the xylene is, the concrete actually seems lighter. But over here on this side, it seems darker in areas. That's because it's still absorbing into the surface in those areas. Whereas over here, it's not so much. It's not able to. The matrix is already taken up. All the space in there is already taken up by the epoxy resin, which is what we try to do. So that difference in absorption, now you're starting to see it a little better on the video. You can see that line there. So we have more absorption taking place over here on this side of it, okay? Boom. Okay, so now what I've done is I ran a 50 grit ceramic over this area, primarily with the goal of getting in between. So if I hit this with a 50 grit, the purpose is not to make that line go away. We'd have to cut so deep back here to make that color change that we don't want to go that deep, okay? But we need to get enough absorption here that when we put some more epoxy over it, it's going to absorb to the relative depth of that. Now, all the micro cracks, even in this lighter area, look at that micro crack right there. It's filled. You know it's filled because it's dark, but on either side of it, here and over there, it's lighter. What does that tell you? Well, the epoxy didn't get down into there. And it didn't because that's really tight material. There's not very many voids and gaps to get to. So if the epoxy is thick, it just can't get down in there. But if we can open that surface up just a little bit, put some fresh, low viscosity epoxy back on it, it should absorb like we want to and get us back to that color there. Now I'm going to test this again with xylene, and what should happen here is we should have a really fast absorption rate where I hit it with those 50s. So let's see. Ba-bam. You notice how you can almost instantly see the line between the two now. That's a good thing. The colors are kind of reversed when you have a solvent on it. That's okay. Don't worry about that. But now, instead of 30 or 45 seconds to see that line, we see it immediately as soon as the xylene hits the floor. And we're going to see more as it sits. But that's good. That tells me we can coat this. We can run 50s on it pretty hard. We can recoat it with low vis epoxy, and we should get a similar color between the two.